let's say we would all say it's a given that there is a God, there is some divine intelligence that created all that is. It's just way too complex. We've talked about that a lot in terms of there has to be a divine intelligence that is behind all of what we know of creation. But probably a big question that we have for ourselves is, how does this God intervene in our lives? Does God care about me? Is God actively intervening and involved in our lives? And it's interesting, in the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, you don't really see a lot of miraculous, supernatural things. It's all very, very human. A lot of the Israelites, they lived their lives, they did their thing, and they saw God's presence in just about everything that they did. If you look at like Abraham, for example, he's going to be the father of the nation, and he's told that he's going to have a child. And 25 years later, Sarah has this child. But before that, Abraham decides to take matters into his own hands, and he's with Hagar, and then they have Ishmael, who Ishmael becomes the Arab nation. And so that's why when you look at the Israelites and the Arabs today, they're technically back historically, they would be half brothers. But other than, I guess, maybe, I don't know how old Sarah was she 80 or something like that when she had this Isaac? So I guess that would be a supernatural story. But it was very, very human. Even when you look at things like there was a flood, there definitely was some type of a flood in Mesopotamia. I don't know, was it a tsunami? What was that they would have interpreted that as like God is punishing us with this? I mean, can you imagine a primitive mind in seeing a tsunami? They would have no clue what that was and be overwhelmed with the power of that. And they would see those things as like God's mad or angry trying to punish us. That's why when you look at like collectively in our consciousness, there's always this thing. I was playing golf last week, and I kept hitting every tree on the golf course, and the guys were kidding me like, what did you do bad last night? And and then there was a part of me thinking, yeah, what did I do last night? So there's always this thing of like something crummy happens, and you think somehow it's because, and it's probably from like years and years ago, there's always been this thing, if something bad happens, we think somehow we're being punished by some deity. But I'd like to talk to you today about what I think is one of the most powerful divine interventions in our experience of life. And that is the development of America. When you look and you go back to this period of time, if you were to ask the question with Alexa or something like that, what is the probability that the American colonists were going to defeat the mighty British Army back in 1776 and a little bit after that? The probability was less than 1%. So there was like no way they were going to win this war. They were just totally ill-equipped. And yet when you look at these people 245 years ago, today, human beings, just like ourselves, met in Philadelphia, and they declared that they were independent, and they wrote their names on this document. Jefferson was 32 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. And they had geniuses like Benjamin Franklin who would edit it. The word, we hold these truths to be self-evident. I think Jefferson wrote certain or absolutely certain. And then Franklin, here he is. Can you imagine these guys all hanging out going, nah, yeah, I think self-evident fits nicer. It's a little smoother. All right, but the people who were there, Jefferson, Franklin, James Madison, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, John Adams. I mean, just an absolutely collective group of brilliant men forming a nation, a democratic republic that it never existed on the face of the earth. And these guys come together and create that document. And when you think about it, in 1776, there were a couple skirmishes in conquered in Lexington in 75, and of course the Boston Tea Party. But in 1776, when they declared themselves independent, they were not independent. And it's sort of an interesting thing when you look at like human life, that they declared it, they were committed to it, they were willing to risk everything they had to make it happen. And because they were so convicted and because they lived in their declaration, they then turned it into a reality. So it's a nice example for ourselves in our lives. You want something to happen in your life, you've got to be committed to it, you've got to declare it, and you got to be willing to do whatever it takes to make it happen. And if you do, miracles take place. But the miracle was not some supernatural changing water into wine, 5 loaves became 5,000, those stories. It was a group of human beings who came together with an idea. America is an idea of freedom. Think about it. When I asked you that question, is there another country that you would rather live in? It's almost like, what? It's not even close. I would think, I hope. And so they got together and they formed this nation. And boy, the fighting and what they had to go through. And little things like they're over in New York and then they got to escape across the river and there's a fog there. There just happens to be a fog. And then they were able to escape, and the British Army, by the time they got there, they were already gone. A lot of little brilliant insights. George Washington must have had a tremendous gut instinct for certain things, which made him a great leader. And all those things inspired and divinely there in these men at that time forming the United States of America. I'd like to take one guy out of that group, and Alexander Hamilton. So Alexander Hamilton was born in the British West Indies. He basically was an illegitimate child. The father abandoned him when he was 11, and his mother died when he was 13. So here's this kid over there, very smart, but he's by himself. And he gets this job, and they start to see that he was pretty smart. And one thing led to another. They brought him to New York. He went to King's College, which became Columbia, and graduated and became an attorney. And obviously, like you know, he was the Secretary of Treasury and was a big part of forming the economic system in America with a strong central government taking on the debt of all the states after the war. But here was this what's the chances of this guy coming to America and so influential, this 13-year-old, and now he's on the $10 bill, for crying out loud. So Alexander Hamilton, he had 5 children, and one thing led to another. Back then there was a lot of honor. If anybody questioned your honor, it was a real assault to who you were, and they would have challenges like duels. But most of those duels, even though they were illegal, they really didn't play themselves out. It was more of just sort of posturing. And so Alexander Hamilton's son they were ridiculing the father, and Hamilton's son stepped up and they got into an argument, and the guy challenged him to a duel. And so then Alexander Hamilton says to his son, listen, we're Christians, so you're not going to shoot this guy. When it comes down to the duel, you shoot the gun up in the air, and this guy will too, and it will be over. But when they did it, he listened to his father. He went like that, and the other guy didn't, and shot him. And can you imagine Alexander Hamilton, the heartache that this guy had, that not only was his son arguing and defending him, which is why the duel happened in the first place, he advised his son to shoot up into the air. How heartbroken they were. And then, of course, we know the story, what happened to him afterwards with Aaron Burr. And Alexander Hamilton did the same thing. When they came to the shooting, Hamilton put his gun up in the air, I think it was in Weehawken, and Aaron Burr shot him right in the abdomen, and he died the next day. So I just say that in terms of like the humanity of these guys. They were like us. But they believed in an idea of America, and they were willing to die for it. You put your name on the Declaration of Independence, if they lost that battle, you know the British were coming after every guy who signed that thing. But they were so committed to making America a reality. We can never lose sight of that. America, freedom, what a beautiful country we have. Do we have flaws? Of course we have flaws. We have a lot of flaws. But there is no country greater than America. And as they grow and move on into the 1800s, and then of course they move into the Civil War, maybe could we say the origin and the real authentic Black Lives Matter movement occurred when 300,000 Union soldiers, most of them were white, there were some African Americans in there fighting, they sacrificed their life. 300,000 Union soldiers, of course we have the Southern soldiers as well, 600,000 I think died, because they believed in the United States of America, bringing the Union together and being committed that, yeah, all men are created equal and everybody has the right for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those guys fought. They sacrificed their lives so that everybody in America could be free. Are we a flawed country? Yes. But when you look at the overall spirit that's in America, it's incredible. It's almost a miracle. And then as you move on in American history, and you move into the Industrial Revolution, and you move into these guys like Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Vanderbilt, Pierre DuPont, J.P. Morgan, they had this vision and they built and created an incredible empire that became America. And as time went on, they didn't like Herbert Hoover, and so they wanted to get rid of him, so they backed up FDR, and he becomes the president. But then FDR turns on J.P. Morgan and blames J.P. Morgan for the collapse of the stock market in 1929. So they wanted to figure, let's have like a scapegoat. So a lot of these guys were like, wow, like here, we backed you to get you in to become the president, and then you turn around and stab us in the back. And, you know, it's interesting. I never even knew this, but so Chrysler, who leaves, he was with GM, which Pierre DuPont started because he didn't like Ford, so he wanted to crunch into the Ford, the Model T. So he develops General Motors, and then Chrysler was there, was a great mechanic, and he left and started his own. So they didn't like each other, and then so you have the Chrysler building. And then Pierre DuPont's got to then turn around and takes I think it was the Astor Astoria or some building, knocks it down and puts up the Empire State Building and tries to make it taller than the Chrysler building. So needless to say, these guys had some big egos. Whose building is taller than the next one? But what I want to say is that Ford did not like Pierre DuPont. They did not like J.P. Morgan. They argued and they fought, and they were all trying to win over each other. And of course, remember, FDR stabbed him in the back. He called Pierre DuPont the merchant of death. because he was all into the gunpowder and the explosives. So all of a sudden, Japan attacks, decimates Pearl Harbor, and we're reeling. I mean, we are in deep trouble after Pearl Harbor. We were not equipped, we were not ready, we were in trouble. So FDR has to now go to DuPont and Ford because they got to build ships, they've got to build airplanes, they've got to get ammunitions. So now he's got to go to them and ask them, hey, listen, just put aside that I was calling you the merchant of death for a while, and if you could now start developing all this. Now again, Ford and DuPont don't like each other, and Ford was willing to give his secrets for the assembly line to DuPont and all these other guys because he knew that the way he was building the cars was the way you had to manufacture planes and the ships. And it killed him to share his secrets with how they did it. But they did it. Why? Because America was more important to these guys with the biggest egos than making money and winning and all that stuff. Nothing was more important to these guys than America. And then you see today sometimes you have like, they interview people like, who was George Washington? He's the guy on the dollar bill, right? He was the second president of the United States after Abraham Lincoln. Oh my God. Like, it's crazy. We a couple of weeks ago, we handed out Fragile, Handle with Care in terms of our faith, right? I think you could say the same thing about America. Fragile, handle with care. We can't take it for granted that this great, beautiful, divinely inspired nation is going to continue to exist if we don't have the commitment, the dedication, and the love for America. Oh my God, what a precious gift we have. You see people burning the flag, turning their face to the flag. I don't even understand it. So when you look at these people, and they're human just like us, but they were willing to live for something beyond themselves. In this case, it was America. But I often wonder, when you look at the world today, I really think we either have a belief of something beyond ourselves, like the living God, or we become totally self-centered. It's one way or the other. It's either all about me, or it's about stepping out of ourselves for something greater beyond ourselves in the world today. And here we are at Good Shepherd. It's the same thing. We have an opportunity at Good Shepherd to take our Catholic faith, which I think is precious, is so important. And have we been called by God? Have we been called to God in a very human way, that if we all come together and give and sacrifice and make a commitment, that a Catholic faith can emerge that accepts everyone, no matter what your sexual orientation, no matter where you're coming from, that Jesus Christ accepts and embraces everyone. What a beautiful opportunity we have. But we have to, just like these great people, we have to have that commitment and the dedication and the willingness to sacrifice and come out of ourselves in order to make it a reality. Think about this in your life. I just love that idea that they were not independent when they declared They were independent. And it was the declaration that was so important to make it a reality. So right now in your life, what is something that you want to declare in your life? Something that you want to make a commitment to? Something that you're willing to give everything you have to make that a reality? Do you trust and do you believe that the living God is inside of you, is going to give you this strength and this ability and this insight? Not in some miraculous way, like we'd all love to rub the Aladdin's lamp and 3 wishes, some miracle. But isn't that kind of passive? Doesn't really require much of us. Hey, all I got to do is rub this lamp. All right. No. God intervenes and God is there. But we got to be willing to do the work. We got to declare and make that commitment. And when we can do that, miracles occur in our life. The miracle of Good Shepherd and the miracle of the United States of America.